All right, everyone, I hope you're doing well. We've got a big video. It's a big one. I'm excited about it. So we're gonna continue doing the branding series over the next few weeks, and I wanted to slip in a fun process video in the meantime. And what we're gonna do is cover scanning, moving into creating a file structure to keep your workflow organized. Next, we're gonna do editing the scan, and then lastly, optimizing and exporting that for social media and so on. So it's a big video, that's a lot to reveal. And as I've mentioned before, I feel like a lot of photographers don't share this stuff, and that's what I always wanted to find is like my favorite photographers and identify like how they do things, and I get it. It's not always gonna be something they wanna share, but I think it's fun, and not to say that my way is the right way. There's a million ways to go about it, and I think this is just one of the ways even that I would do it. But it's gonna be fun, it's gonna be a lot of information, so hang in there. And what we're gonna look at is some frames that I shot the other day on the Mamiya 7, one of my favorite cameras, I love it. We're gonna go ahead and jump in, and I'm looking forward to it. Let's start looking at some of these technical specs that we're gonna be going through today. Boom. So we're gonna start by scanning our negative in the Epson V600. And that's what I use. It's not the best scanner out there, but it's affordable. It gets the job done. And if you know what you're doing, you can really get amazing results with it. So we're gonna use that paired with Silverfast 8, which is a software that I use with the scanner that has tons of latitude and control in terms of colors and really getting the results that you want. It also has built-in film profiles for different film stocks, which I love that as well. And there are many different programs out there. I'm not gonna say it's the best because I've not used them all, but it's what I use, and I don't spend a ton of time in there. What I like to do is get what I need out of it, getting a very general direction for the scan, and then I bring it into either Photoshop, Lightroom, Capture One, whatever I plan to do there. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and get the scanning process going, and I'm gonna show you how to do that, and we'll proceed with the edit as well. Okay, so we're here at the Epson V600, and we're gonna just load in this film very simply, almost lazily. So we'll open that up. It does come with a 120 film holder and also a 35 as well. First things first, we're gonna grab a little cloth and we're gonna wipe this up, make sure it's nice and dust-free. And then judging by where the film holder goes and where the opening is at the top of this scanner, we're gonna drop our film in with our gloves on about where we think it'll work. So I think that's good. No A&G glass, no tape, no nothing, just right on there. Now this film has been dried properly. It's nice and straight. There is a little bit of curvature, but I think that'll be fixed in the process. So let's go ahead and close this up and let's see how she does. Okay, so now that we got the negative in the scanner, we're gonna go ahead and take a look into Silverfast 8. Again, you don't have to use this software, but I really recommend it. I think it's great. You're gonna get so much better results when it comes to final scans versus using like Epson Scan and even some other softwares. It's got a lot of control that you might not find in other software as well. So that's why I use it, it's why I encourage it as well. I'm not sponsored by them. I think it's a great product, use it. So let's jump in, and I'm gonna show you my settings really quick and what I typically do. Okay, so I try and keep it pretty brief in here. I don't spend a ton of time or tinker for hours. I like to get all of the information I need out of the photograph and then utilize that and make adjustments all in Photoshop or Capture One perhaps. So first things first, once you've got the film in your scanner, what you'd want to do first is a pre-scan. And that's just going to do a pre-scan, give you a general look of what you're getting on this scan. So I've already done that. But in doing so, what you'll do is set up these frame lines. You can add in multiple frame lines. So we've got 2 frames here. I've just done the one here for this example. So once that's done, as you make adjustments and fine tune things, it'll update the scan, do some like micro scans in the meantime to then update what you actually get for your final scan. So we've not done a final scan yet. This is just our pre-scan. So settings here, we're gonna keep that on transparency here. And this is a negative, so we're doing negative. And I use 48 to 24 bit, and then this frame tool is just where you'd find your frames, delete your frames, or it can select frames for you. It does a pretty good job actually. So we've got our frame here, we can move that, adjust it. It might make some adjustments as we change it, but I think it looks pretty good right there. And now we're gonna zoom in. We can use the magnifying glass here or Command plus to zoom in. And bring that down just a touch there. You can also rotate as needed with this little hand tool. All right, so as far as adjustments go, I don't do much. I've got it set on 3200 PPI. Then for the midtone, I might bring that up just a little bit. And I'm not gonna mess with anything else until I go to my Negafix, which is where we're gonna pick our film stock. So we are using Kodak Portra 400, as you can see. Let's go to Portra. And I actually, for this example, I think I like the 160 VC. Let's see. Yeah, I think I do. I'm gonna do the 160 NC actually. Exposure's great, and I'm going to increase the saturation a bit. Not a ton, but just enough to make those colors pop a little bit. And as far as contrast, I might add a whisper of contrast. I've got the midtone brought up a touch already. And then for the histogram, I won't do much. I might bring a little bit of red into the highlights there for that golden hour look. And then lastly, in the global color correction tab, I like to push my photos to the warmer side. I think that's just more of my style and my preference, but a lot of film photographers like to use a little cooler tones, but I like a little bit warmer. So we're just gonna push the entire image a little bit warmer by bringing that this direction. There we go, that looks great. Okay. Perfect. And as far as unsharp masking, I don't like to do much sharpening in this software, perhaps maybe in Photoshop, but I've got it on less auto sharpness. And that's really it. You can go into gradation and make adjustments with the curves. There is a color cast removal, which is pretty great. It'll do an auto adjustment for you, which I think is fantastic. And usually it's pretty spot on. But outside of that, that's really it. We're gonna adjust the picture settings, use Negafix to find what we like as far as our color profile, then make some minute adjustments on the histogram, and then lastly, some global color correction. And that's it. I spend no more than 90 seconds, 2 minutes on each frame, and you can actually recycle that same setting if you need to. So after that, we're gonna hit Command S or click Scan here, and that'll take about 30 to 60 seconds depending on your resolution, and that'll be done. It'll save it in our folder, and then we'll jump over there. So our scan is done, and as you can see, I've finished the scan here. And let's jump to the desktop, and I can show you where that lives. In our entries scans folder that we made, we have the diner scan. So first things first, in creating a little file structure for this and keeping organized, what we'll do is we'll create a place for the scan to live. We'll create a new folder for our adjustments to live, or output if you will. And then lastly, we'll create a landing pad for our selects, we'll call them, which would be kind of like the JPEG version or the final output that we're gonna do. And that's a great way to do things. Where you have your scan living separately from your edit is great because you can always go back to that scan where it's been unaltered or unadjusted. And then, then having your placement for an edit, you can then go back and make adjustments to the edit and then create a new select from that as well. So what we're gonna do first is go to this folder here and we're gonna duplicate it. There is duplicate right there. So now we've duplicated that. We're gonna change this to output. Perfect. And while we're in here, we're gonna go ahead and make a new folder and call it selects. So again, you've got 3 folders, one for your scans, one for your output, meaning what your adjustments and edits are going to be. So you've got that working file. And then lastly, your selects, which will be your final, probably a JPEG in this scenario. So we've got that. Our scan will leave unaltered rather, and then we'll go to the output, and let's go ahead and open that up in Photoshop. We've got a TIFF file here, and open in Photoshop. So if you don't use one, I would encourage it, but I use a Wacom tablet. I use this for all of my Photoshop work, retouching, as well as graphic design, things of that nature. So if you don't use one, I would encourage it. It's great for making, minor changes, making adjustments, retouching as well. And I'll spend more time in different videos going over that, but I think it's a great tool and I use mine all the time. It takes a while to get used to, but I love it. All right, so we're gonna kind of do this on the fly. I don't know what I'm gonna do exactly to this photo, but we'll just kind of work through it together and we'll see what we get from that. So first off, we are in Photoshop. I'm gonna hit F to go into full screen. And I'm gonna zoom in just a touch and slide this around a bit, back out a bit. So first things first, I would say we're gonna duplicate our layer. We've got this background layer. We don't want to make adjustments to that. We want to do what's called non-destructive editing. So we're gonna duplicate that layer so we have this copy and we can make adjustments there. I am gonna do a quick crop. I'm gonna clear these dimensions out and we're just going to bring it in a touch. Zoom in a little bit. I think I like it maybe around there. I don't think we need all of that frame line in there. That feels good. I kind of like, you know, cropping that out a little bit. It's kind of cool. It's reminiscent. It's there, but it's not blaring at you. And that looks good. So we're gonna hit OK. Give that a moment to load in. And there we go. I feel pretty good about that. And I'm just hitting Command plus or minus to zoom in or out. I know a lot of you aren't familiar with Photoshop, and that's okay. But honestly, it's one of my favorite tools. If I spend a lot of time in anything, it'll be Photoshop. And I think that that's one tool that I was very afraid of and had a hard time learning for years. And then finally I said, this is my goal, I'm gonna learn it. So I did, and honestly, it's the greatest tool ever. And if you're like, why just use Lightroom? I promise you, you're cheapening the value of your photography. Lightroom is great, but it's very limiting. And Photoshop actually has its own, you know, it is basically Lightroom that lives inside. It's called ACR, Adobe Camera Raw. And I'm gonna show you how to access that right here. So we've created this separate layer to use and make adjustments on. What we're gonna do is make a smart object with this layer. And what that does is it allows us to make adjustments that we can then edit and change or reduce later on. So there's a shortcut for that, but I'm gonna hit Control and right click rather, and convert to smart object. And this basically makes a sub file within this primary file that you can, again, kind of reference and adjust on its own, and then make adjustments later to reduce the changes or, you know, remove the changes as needed. So we've got that, that's a smart layer, and the shortcut to go to Adobe Camera Raw on this layer, make sure you have this layer selected, is Shift Command A, or you can also go to Filter, and then go to Camera Raw Filter. So we're gonna do Shift Command A because I love a good shortcut. And that will bring up the Adobe Camera Raw dialog here. Now this will look incredibly familiar for anyone that uses Lightroom. And it's the identical program basically with a little different interface, but it's the same thing. And again, you can do all these things in Photoshop, then further enhance your photo. Whereas with Lightroom, you're kind of limited, or you can do a full cycle through Photoshop, but this keeps it all right here. I will say making these smart objects within the file will create a larger file, but if you're working with an external hard drive, you're gonna be okay either way. So as far as adjustments here, I'm actually gonna use a filter or a preset. I don't usually use presets. I think that, you know, their popularity is silly, but I have one that I've made. It's just gonna warm things up, and I will tell you it's a very drastic preset. And the reason I use this in Photoshop is we can create this layer, add the preset, and then adjust the opacity of the preset. So then we're not getting this like full-on preset. Whereas in Lightroom, I think there are some plugins where you can adjust the value of a preset. But again, like the reason that you don't or you can't do that in Lightroom, I think, is because Photoshop, because Photoshop. So we're gonna add this, Blake 2020 Warm is the preset. We're gonna hit OK. And again, this is super drastic. I would never use this out of the box like this, but for this example and for the reason I built this preset is for these scenarios where I can use it in Adobe Camera Raw. And then what we're gonna do is just bring that down. And what we're doing is bringing down the fill. You can also do the opacity too. There is a difference, but I tend to work with the fill for this particular scenario. But I'll do the opacity in this bit right about, we'll say 30% looks good to me. So that's that. Again, we cut this layer off or turn this layer off. We have our base layer, which is doing nothing pretty much outside of just being a solid standing reference point. We'll turn this one on, and then up next, what do we want to do? So let's look at the photo a little bit. Let's bring it in a touch. So as far as retouching goes, I do have a little like scan error here, piece of dust or something. Outside of that, I don't spend a lot of time bothering with, you know, dust, hair. I think it's kind of cool. It's part of the process, and I'm comfortable living with it. So let's make a layer by hitting Command N, and we'll call this Heal. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna use our, let's see, spot healing brush. And what I will do is just hit J, which is the shortcut for that. And then we're gonna use Z to zoom in and just drag in with our cursor. And I've got this, and we're just gonna hit it with our healing brush tool, and that's that. There are a few other spots we could touch up, and Photoshop is super smart and does a great job with this. If you need to go crazy, you can, and here's a great example. So say this little thermostat is driving me crazy, I don't want it there. What we'll do is I'm gonna make my brush a little bit bigger. You can use the brackets, or also if you hold Control Option, you can drag left, right. It's gonna go bigger or smaller. Up and down will change your hardness. Super cool. So we're gonna just go over the entirety of that and see how that turns out. Boom, it's gone. That looks great. I'm impressed, actually. And there is a little like water spot or something here that I'm gonna try and tackle as well. And again, we're just using the healing brush tool. It's very simple, and it just kind of uses and calculates from other parts of the image to try and update and extract information to adjust to these areas. So there's that, and let's see what else we want to do. There's a little bit of purple fringing, a little purple cast going on over here. We can adjust that pretty easily. So we're gonna go in here and make an adjustment layer, that's how you get to those in this little tool here. So let's do this. Let's go to color balance, actually, and we're gonna adjust the mid-tones. That's probably a mid-tone. These would be your highs, your lows would be in the shadows. We're gonna bring in some yellow to about -7. Bring in some red to about 10, 11 or so. And then push in some green, just a hair. Because the opposite of green in this RGB world is going to be magenta, and magenta is our problem, so let's push in a little bit of green. It's about right there. Okay, great. I think that looks good. Let's cut that on and off. Boom, boom, warmed it up a little bit, and you can even bring down the opacity of that layer a touch. Up next, for an adjustment layer, what I'll do is add in some saturation, and I'm going to show you how to do a quick mask on saturation. So I like the pop of color that the booth has, this red booth. So we're gonna bring the saturation up a little bit for that. Say 10 or 11. And this is the mask here. You see it's all white. White reveals, and then black conceals. So what we're gonna do is select that mask and invert it. You can do a right click on that. Maybe you can't, let's see. If you can invert it through a right click, but you can do Command I, and that will invert it, or Shift Command I believe it might be. I've updated my keyboard shortcuts, but Command I will invert that. And then what we're gonna do is grab our brush tool by pressing B. And I know I'm moving fast, but we're just going through the process, and there will be more on this later. So we've inverted the mask. It's now essentially a saturation adjustment layer, but it's not revealing any of that because it's all a black mask. But now we're gonna use our brush tool on the mask selected here and brush in some of that saturation. And this is why I love Photoshop. Love, love, love Photoshop. So let's see what our flow is set to. Let's set it to maybe 60, and that's up here. Okay, so we're just gonna brush in on this area of the booth just to increase the saturation there. Very simple, nothing to it really, just adding a little saturation. And now you can see in the mask there's this area of white, that's where we're revealing that saturation. So I'll cut this on and off, and you might be able to see in YouTube land how that's worked for us. We've done that, and then I might also do one more layer. I feel like that purple over there is still kind of bothering me a little bit. So let's do this. Let's go to selective color. Let's go to reds, and let's pull out magenta. And then the same thing, I'm gonna close that dialog box. We're going to invert this mask, okay? And then we're gonna get our brush, and then I'm gonna set the flow to about 40% and just hit over here in this area, and we're just removing that magenta cast. Maybe even right up there too. Maybe down here, I see it a little bit. And I think that's good. All right, and then the last thing that I'll probably do is I wanna add a little warmth to come from this window. So we're gonna add let's do one more color balance, and we're gonna bring that, and let's go to highlights rather. Bring that a little to the red side and a little bit to the yellow side, just a bit. And we're gonna invert this same mask, invert, get our brush tool. I'm gonna set the flow to 20%. And what I'm doing here is just hitting shift, hold shift, and then press 2. We'll go to 20, hold shift, go to 6, 60, and so on. But we're gonna go to flow of 20 and just brush in a little bit of that warm color. Warm color, warm color, I love them. All right, I think we've done enough there. And let's turn that off and on really quick. Let that load, that's a larger brush, they can buffer for a moment. Off, on, and that's a little drastic, so what I'll do is just bring down the opacity of that layer just a little bit till it looks good. All right, so then we'll bring that opacity down to about 72%, and that's feeling pretty good. And then lastly, I might do a levels layer. So for levels, I think the highlights are pretty good. I don't want to blow anything out here, but I might bring the midtones up a little bit. As you can see, this middle slider is going to adjust your midtones. It'll bring in contrast if you go to the right, and then I'm going to actually bring it down a little bit to open up some of those lower shadows in the bottom of the image. All right, so that's looking pretty good for me. There is a bit of green going on. Let's see, what's the best way to adjust that? Let's do a color balance again, and then I think it's mostly in the midtones. Bring that a little bit to the magenta side. And then lastly, I'm going to do one more layer and increase the saturation just a bit more. That's an overall adjustment. So we have all these layers. What we've done is some selective color adjustments, a bit of color balance to add some warmth, and then also a levels to bring the midtones up a bit. And then over here, we've done a final color balance and saturation as well. And I'm going to actually take all of these and select them all and hit Command G. And then we're gonna name this a adjustments layer. All right, so that's it for edits. I don't really have anything else I want to do. It looks great. I feel great about this. So now what we're going to do is prepare it for saving as a JPEG and exporting and kind of optimizing that for social media, which a lot of folks don't realize there is a way to optimize things for social media. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So let me backtrack here. So what we're going to do is stamp visible. And there's a shortcut for that. And what that does is takes all the information and adjustments that we've done and takes almost like a screen grab of that and creates its own separate layer of all the final products. So the shortcut for that is Option Command Shift E. And you'll see that produce right here. There's a layer, and it's essentially all of our adjustments in one single layer. So in doing so, we're gonna take that and then all of our below layers and just group those together by hitting Command G. And then I'm going to name that edits. Now we have this final outcome here. And what we're gonna do then is create a solid color. If you hold down your adjustment layer options here, let's go to solid color. And this is just gonna create one solid fill color. And we're gonna do FFF. And what that is pure white. And then we're gonna take that layer and drop it just below this layer. I know it sounds confusing, but very simply done. We have now a solid white color below our basically final frame. And we're gonna use our crop tool now. So we'll hit C for crop tool. It's also right here, as you can see. And what I wanna do is put it in a 4:5 ratio. And that's an aspect ratio that Instagram permits. That's kind of the tallest of the ratios that you can do. And why we do this is now we can show our image in the largest format possible and then have it in this beautiful frame of white. And we're also taking up the maximum screen placement on an iPhone or Android smartphone, so on. A lot of folks tend to do these in a square crop, and I think that's because they're using a VSCO or VSCO application, or maybe they're not, I'm not sure. But if you do it in 4:5, you're actually getting a larger screen real estate, and I think that's the intention behind it. So we have that crop here, and we're just gonna hold Option and then scale it up until we get our image where we want it. Now I like to have mine just inside the border and about here, and I'm going to hit OK. And this will take a moment as the file is pretty large at this rate. Really taking a moment here. All right, so that's pretty much where we want our image to be. So the last thing we're gonna do is export it. So you can do that by going to File, Export, and then I do Save for Web. And that's my preference. You can do Export As or Quick Export as JPEG. I do Save for Web, and I've got a shortcut here and I'll use that. Option Command Shift S. And that dialog will pop up in just a moment. And I'll show you my settings here. All right, so now that that's loaded up, we've got a few options over here, and no, you can't really see the full image. Let's drop it down maybe like a 12%. There we go, that's perfect. So I've got here just JPEG as our setting. There's a preset that I've made, but disregard that. JPEG on maximum quality, 100. You can also bring that down to like 80, 60. It really won't change that much, I promise. And then we're gonna convert to sRGB, which is web ready. And that's what you're gonna see for any web application pretty much. And then lastly, we're gonna do is set this in a parameter or a scale that is play friendly with Instagram. I think a lot of folks might output this huge file in Instagram, and I swear to you, I could be wrong, I swear though. Instagram doesn't like compressing these files or reducing their scale, and I think it almost doesn't like it, just a hunch, I could be wrong. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring this down to what Instagram does play nicely with, and what that's gonna be is 1080 pixels wide and by 1350, and that's the max you're gonna get for a 4:5 resolution, or 4:5 orientation rather. So we've got that, we're going to hit save, and that's all we're gonna do. And then up next, we're just gonna tell it where we want it to live, and that's gonna be it. So in our desktop, we're gonna go to Selects, Diner Scan, and Save. That's it. And last thing we're gonna do is, since we finished everything in Photoshop, we'll go ahead and hit Save, hit OK, and that's it. Okay, so I know that was a lot. I think it's, again, it's gonna vary for different people how you wanna do this, but this is how I do things, and I think that it works well. I now have a scan TIFF that I can reference later and maybe re-edit or change my edit. I now have an editable file that I've done that I can use to reference later and make adjustments, change layers, add new layers, further edit. If I learn something new, I'm like, oh, I wanna try that out. I'll do that all the time. And then lastly, I've got a JPEG that's gonna be used for output for social media, which I can airdrop that to myself, and that's really it. So I hope this was helpful. I know it was a lot, and I hope you're still sticking around. And you know, if there's any questions, please leave them in the comments below. There's some many ways to skin the cat here, but I think this is a very useful way, and I know there's more to be learned as far as Photoshop goes, but this is how I do things, how I like to see them done, and how I get the best results. So thanks for watching. Looking forward to doing this again soon, and have a great week.